Hi, this is Dr. Shirley Caruso. Thank you for joining me. In this tutorial, you will learn how to complete part 2 of your scripted lesson plan template for your 1-hour unit of instruction. By now, you should have received feedback on your part 1, audience and objective, and now you're ready to proceed to part 2, overview and background. So the first section asks you to provide an overview of the content. So I'm going to do that here. So what I've said here is this unit of instruction will include easy to follow detailed illustrations and demonstrations of how to properly wear a surgical mask. Practice and feedback will be a major component of this unit of instruction to allow volunteers to gain confidence and satisfaction with using their new skill. The volunteers will practice with real objects. So in other words, because this is a psychomotor domain of learning, I've decided that to better help the volunteers with this new skill, they should use real masks rather than just showing them some presentations or demonstrating how to put on the mask. I've indicated here that I'm going to allow them to practice and give them feedback on how they are putting on their masks and wearing their masks. So that's the overall content, and I'm also intending to make this unit of instruction very easy to follow with detailed illustrations and demonstrations. So then on to letter B, background information on why this unit of instruction was developed. Here you can embellish a little bit on the topic of training that you have decided to create, and you can give a little background and make it your own. So why do you think this instruction is necessary? What new knowledge, skills, or attitudes will it provide? And why is that important? So what I have included here is a couple of paragraphs talking about the background information. This unit of instruction was developed to ensure protection for the hospital volunteers, as well as protection for the patients they will be assisting. This 1-hour unit of instruction will provide an authentic learning experience that will assure transfer of new skills to the hospital setting. So I am going to simulate in my 1-hour unit of instruction the hospital setting so that the skills will be transferred very easily once these volunteers get back on their jobs. The next, letter C, asks for justification for selection of instructional methodologies. So here I'm going to start populating this part of my script, but justifying and explaining along the way why I have selected the activities or the instructional methodologies for each of these learning events. You can see that all of Gagne's 9 events of learning have already been populated here, and the middle column asks for what activity or what instructional methodology has been selected, and then to the far right you are to explain why you chose this activity or this instructional methodology. Also, these methodologies or these activities that appear in bold must be used at least once. So you don't have to use case study once, information search once, jigsaw once, but out of these that are in bold, you must select one instance of using them. So for example, if I decide to use a case study, then I will have satisfied this requirement because I have used one of them in bold at least one time. I do not have to then make sure that I use these other that are bolded. You can use the others multiple times, but the ones that are in bold, you have to use one instance of a bolded type of activity at least once. So what you're going to do now is you're going to go to your Best Learning Experiences handout, and this is going to help you with the selection based on the knowledge that you know that the domain of learning is psychomotor. In this example, it is psychomotor. For your unit of instruction, it might be another domain of learning. Nevertheless, this handout is going to help you make your selections. In addition, I'm going to use Gagne's 9 Events of Instruction handout to help me choose what activity would be best for each event of learning. So from my best learning experience handout, under session starters, I can see session starters are good for the affective, the psychomotor, and the cognitive domains of learning. And these are brief activities to bring the learners into the content through participating in a puzzle, question, discussion, or other activity. So I am going to replace this with, I'm deciding that I am going to use question and discussion to start off this training session, this 1-hour unit of instruction. Under this event of learning, I'm going to use a session starter, and the session starter I'm going to use is a question and discussion. And I know that in the next section, part 3, I'm going to have to explain exactly what question I'm going to pose, and I'm going to have to explain how I would like to facilitate the discussion. But for now, I just need to write here that it's going to be a question and it's going to be discussion. And then over here, I need to explain why I have chosen this activity. Why have I chosen question? Why have I chosen discussion? So here I've explained that I chose to pose a question as a session starter because I want the learners to think about why it is important to properly wear a mask. I want this to be a two-way conversation, so that's why I've also included this activity discussion. I know that in the next section, I'm actually going to have to say what the question is, and I'm going to have to give directions on how to facilitate the discussion. But for now, I've done my explanation and I've chosen my methodologies for session starter for this first event, which is gain attention of the students. So now I'm going to go on to give you an example of the second event. For informed students of the objectives, I decided to use a presentation, and the reason is because a presentation is a one-way dialogue. So I chose presentation because it's a one-way delivery of information to help them understand what they are to learn during this instruction. In other words, it's not something that I'm going to discuss with them and negotiate with them. I'm going to actually set forth and let them know exactly what they are going to learn in this 1-hour unit of instruction. So I know in the next section I'll actually have to be more explicit on the things that I'm going to say, and I'm going to also have to choose a media. But for now, I've chosen the activity and I've explained why I've chosen the activity. So I'm going to go along to the next. And for this event of learning, stimulate recall of prior learning, I've decided that the activity that I am going to use is a discussion. And I chose it because it will allow me to ask questions about their previous experiences with wearing a mask. Perhaps they used a mask while cleaning or doing yard work, and the learners can then give examples of their own previous experiences. For the next event of learning, present the content, I've decided upon demonstration as the activity. And I've decided this because with a demonstration, I can explain the steps in properly wearing a mask. I can also show them the differences between an improperly worn mask versus a properly worn mask, all while having that real object, that real mask, to show them the differences. For this event of learning, provide learning guidance, I've decided upon an additional presentation to provide the learners with some additional instructional support. For elicit performance, I've decided on 2 activities, a role play and then a discussion, because a role play will allow the learners to practice wearing their masks in a simulated hospital situation. Of course, I will have to write this role play as one of my handouts or one of my non-projected visuals. Then I will follow the role play up with a discussion, which will then allow the learners to react to the role play situation and maybe discuss any barriers they encountered. Notice that by selecting role play, I have satisfied the requirement of choosing at least one of these in bold types. So I have satisfied the requirement in that I have selected role play. And this next event, provide feedback, I chose discussion and demonstration so that I could follow up with the previous activity with a discussion and let the learners know how well they did with wearing their masks in that simulated situation, and perhaps even giving them a demonstration. Perhaps if they didn't have it completely covering their mouths, I could then put on a mask and demonstrate further how the mask must completely cover their mouth. For assess performance, I've decided to use a skill performance test because this type of test will have the learners actually require them to wear the mask properly and to demonstrate that they are capable of wearing the mask properly. For the last event of learning or instruction, enhance retention and transfer to the job, I've decided upon a cookbook job aid, and I've decided upon this because this type of job aid will allow a list of the steps in properly wearing a surgical mask with simple graphics. For the next section, letter D, justification for selection of media and materials, be sure that you're using the media selection checklist from the Week 2 folder for guidance. Also be sure that you are using a variety of media materials, so non-projected, projected, display surfaces, real objects, audio, or motion visuals. So for the first event of learning, I've decided upon a projected visual. This is going to be my PowerPoint slide 1. And I've decided on using a projected visual because it allows several participants to respond simultaneously. It's minimally expensive and it's appropriate for small or large groups. For the second event of learning, I've decided upon a projected visual, PowerPoint slide 2, because it's going to allow me to present a lesson outline. For stimulate recall, I've decided upon a projected visual as well as a motion visual, and this is going to be my PowerPoint slide 3. And in that, I'm going to include a link to a YouTube video. Just making some notes here. And this is going to allow me to prepare these things in advance, and also the video that I'm going to show is going to allow me to stop and start it to control the pacing or to replay as I see fit. For present the content, I'm going to use a real object, and that real object is going to be a surgical mask, because this is going to enable the learners to see and touch the actual object. For provide learning guidance, I've decided upon a projected visual. This is going to be my PowerPoint slide 4 because it's going to present high quality, realistic visual images. For elicit performance, I've decided upon a non-projected visual, and this is going to be my role play handout, and it's going to allow the users to control the pacing so they can reread the handout as many times as they want. It's also going to present them with a situation that leads into the discussion. provide feedback, I'm going to use a real object, and that's going to be the surgical mask. Again, because it's going to enable the learners to see and touch the actual object. For assess performance, I am going to decide upon a non-projected visual, and that is my skill test in the checklist form because it allows me to prepare that in advance. And enhance retention and transfer to the job, I've decided upon a non-projected visual. That is going to be my cookbook job aid, and that's going to allow that material to be taken from the training so that the learners can refer back to it. Notice that when you get into the development of these materials, you're going to have to develop at least one projected visual and one non-projected visual. In addition, you will have to develop a cookbook job aid and a skills test. So plan on providing at least one handout that's in addition to the job aid. So in my case, I have provided a handout during the training, and that handout is the role play that I have created or that I will create. So now that I'm finished with this, I am going to be able to take away all of these directives. I don't need those anymore. I'm going to make sure that the italics are gone. The italics are all gone here. I can take away all of these directives here. And it just goes into my chart. And then the last thing would be letter E, which would be to include any notes to the instructors. So I've instructed in the scripted lesson plan, I plan on putting the words that I want the instructor to say, I plan on putting them in italics and quotes. So I've notated to the instructor that text in italics and quotes are for you to say. Once you are familiar with the script, you may use your own words, because he doesn't want to sound like a robot just reading from a script. And then also I've notated here that PPT stands for PowerPoint because that's how I'm going to notate it in the Part 3 scripted lesson plan. So now this is complete and it is ready to be submitted into the assignment submission folder. Even though you have not yet completed Part 3, you can leave Part 3 on here just as a blank, and you will also be adding to what you've already completed for Part 1. I will only be looking at the Part 2 for grading. In this tutorial, you have learned how to complete Part 2 of your scripted lesson plan template for your 1-hour unit of instruction. I hope you have found this tutorial helpful.